I'm wrapping up the first year, and I think giving kind of a report back, and I'll be honest, the first 6-9 months into the job, it's just learning the whole time. I mean, you're constantly learning, and learning how the Congress works, learning what the federal government's role is, learning what it isn't, and it's almost like you've peeled off a wall and you look behind it and you see all of the wiring, and you go there thinking it's going to be one thing, and you realize just the complexities of how the federal government works, and all of the groups who come before you asking you to move it one way or move it this way, and then I kind of realize half my job is fixing what's broken and making repairs, and then the other half is looking forward and offering kind of a vision for the future. And as far as fixing what's broken, I think there's a couple different areas to break down. One would be immigration, and certainly there are fixes that need to be made there. It was encouraging that the Senate passed comprehensive immigration reform. I'm still hopeful the House can, and I think that needs to include the roadmap to citizenship for the 11.5 million undocumented. Also, make sure if we recruit people from across the world to come here to study, that we have a way for them to stay here rather than take the education, go across the world, and compete against us. And then there's no doubt that there are still issues with border security. As a prosecutor, it was so frustrating when I would have a case and I would see that the person had reoffended and that they were here, we knew they were here, they served a prison sentence, and then were released back into the community, weren't being removed. So I think all around, whether it's what you do with people who are hardworking and want to follow the rules who are here undocumented, what you want to do with people who are not following the rules, but we just keep them here and we're not removing them, it's a system that needs to be fixed. Also, fixes that need to be made, equality. We still have a long way to go when it comes to gay rights, marriage equality. I think it was a landmark decision out of the Supreme Court, and I supported in a amicus brief to repeal Prop 8 and also to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, I'm hopeful that that can be passed. It was passed in the Senate. The House still has work to do to make sure that LGBT Americans aren't discriminated against. And then also when it comes to the Fair Pay Act, women still make 77 cents on the dollar for men doing the same job. Public safety, fixes that need to be made there. We need to have an assault weapons ban. And that was the first piece of legislation that I signed on to as soon as I got there, and I was asked to be the freshman whip for the Democratic assault weapons ban package. And I learned how hard it is in some parts of the country for even Democrats to get on board. And I came to appreciate that there is just a gun-owning culture in our country where people think even if you take a military-style weapon, the next step is going to be the hunting shotgun or the handgun. And I think California, we already have an assault weapons ban. We already have a magazine limit. We already have pretty intense background checks, but that doesn't do anything if you can just go to surrounding states and buy your guns and then bring them here. So work needs to be done there. And then finally, as far as fixes, I think privacy. The NSA and what we learn every day. In my prediction, by the way, every year I do this prediction with friends. I've been doing it for about 10 years. We try and predict who the person of the year is going to be for Time magazine. And my pick, and I picked it about a month ago, is Edward Snowden. I think not because of anything heroic he's done, but I think for what he has revealed and how important it's going to be for really addressing privacy issues and the overreach of the NSA. I mean, what they
go with Miley Cyrus?
Not going to go with it. She's a wrecking ball of her own.
Jeez.
Yes, but no, I think Edward Snowden, what he's revealed, and just the depth of the mining that the NSA is doing on Americans is it crosses the line. And I think people accept that the NSA and the CIA need to be working day and night to try and find terrorists abroad, find out if they're connecting with anyone here at home. But downloading my mom's cell phone data every day and what her location is, and innocent Americans, I think crosses the line, and they need to be more targeted, and we need to have a policy that reflects the changing times and technologies. And I'm just can only imagine what we'll learn tomorrow when we open up the newspaper, and that's kind of where we're at with the NSA right now. Is we learn more and more every day, and I voted for what was called the Amash Amendment, which would have stopped the NSA's current PRISM program, as well as now what's known as the Upstream program, where they're not just downloading the cell phone data, they're taking that data and they're able to tell what your location is. And I think most Americans would say that's too far. When I was a prosecutor, every cell phone case I used, and I proved a number of homicides using cell phone cases, I had to go to a judge every time and talk about why the information was relevant to the investigation. And I think the NSA could do much. So that's the repair side that I see right now that's needed. Immigration, work to be done on public safety, work to be done on privacy, and work to be done on equality. Going forward, looking at economic recovery, it's still fragile. Today's jobs report was encouraging, 200,000 new jobs, unemployment at 7%, and the best unemployment claims numbers in the last 6 years. But I knock on doors every weekend. For the last campaign, we knocked on 100,000 doors. I've been knocking on doors since June. You still talk to many folks who are either right out of college, can't find a job, can't find a full-time job, or mid-career folks who are either at fear of getting laid off because they're worried about if they lose their job that we're moving to a low-skilled economy, or mid-career folks who have been laid off and have been long-term unemployed. And that's what concerns me the most. Now, I think our area, the Bay Area, and I have 2 national laboratories in my district, can really lead the way when it comes to the future economy. And I look at the future U.S. economy and what it means in the global economy. And what we're seeing is with middle classes doubling in Brazil, Russia, India, China, other parts of the world that have never had economic prosperity and opportunity, it means that the United States is no longer the trading post for the world. There are other places to go. There's more competition for where you receive your goods and services, and that's why our trade deficit continues to grow. We've kind of stopped it and are starting to turn that trade deficit around, but it's been on average about $40 billion being imported more every month than being exported, and that's a big problem. But I think the innovation economy, the knowledge economy, is where we need to go. And so for me, I call it the 3-legged stool to get to innovation. And the first leg of the stool for me is having access to capital. That's really critical for businesses to start up, get off the ground, and create jobs and grow the economy. So for me, access to capital, I've done 2 things to try and help the local economy. One was the Main Street Revival Act that I introduced to try and put more capital into economically distressed areas, allowing employers to defer their payroll contribution in their first year, having to pay in years 2, 3, and 4, but really letting them focus on creating jobs, and hopefully those are high-tech jobs in those areas. Second, being a way to allow any city that lost redevelopment money to have a new box to check under the Economic Development Administration's grant program for economic assistance. And so knowing that there were abuses of redevelopment money, but there were some projects that got started and were halted, and one of them being in Fremont for the Warm Springs BART station, which would connect the BART station to the Tesla plant and development around it. And so hoping that the cream would rise to the top and just giving an extra box to check there. So again, putting more capital to cities, more capital to entrepreneurs and businesses. Also, as far as access to capital, the United States has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and we're at about tied with Japan at about 29%. And so I'd like to bring down our corporate tax rate, not encourage companies to offshore jobs. Right now, we have a tax code that does encourage that, and so push more for a Made in America agenda. And so that's the first leg of the stool, which is putting more access to capital out there for entrepreneurs. Second would be having a brain trust of individuals, a pipeline to support the innovation economy. And we're seeing our children are performing right in the middle when it comes to science and math. And I think those are the two skills that I certainly neglected when I was in high school and college. And I think many people wish if they could go back, they would have learned how to code or would have spent more time in trigonometry and calculus and chemistry, because that's where our economy is going right now. And
I've never wished that, Eric. Not once.
well,
I was going to say
if
that.
you're
Not once.
if you're looking for a job right now, I think you're seeing that those are the fields that are growing. And so making sure our kids, in doing this through the science committee that I'm on, making sure that our programs are supporting and enabling teachers to teach to those science, technology, engineering, and math skills. And then the other part of that brain trust is mid-career folks that I talked about, and workforce retraining. And so we're going to be introducing a bill very shortly that will allow folks who have IRAs or 401ks to take the money out and not be penalized if they use it for workforce retraining, education costs. And there are great penalties for that right now, and it's my hope that we would allow them to use that to retrain, re-educate themselves for this 21st century economy. The third leg of that stool, for me, is having a risk-taking culture. I think Silicon Valley is what it is today because of the risk-taking culture. The Bay Area is what it is today because of a risk-taking culture. And so having that risk-taking culture, for me, means one, and I talked about it a moment ago, having comprehensive immigration reform. We know immigrants take risks to come here, to leave everything behind, and 40% of the largest companies in the United States were founded by immigrants. But also continuing to make investments in basic research at the federal level, whether it's at our national laboratories, our research universities, national institutes of health. I think the work that can be done on the basic research side can be transferred and has been transferred out to the vaccines we use today, to the technology we use today. And unfortunately, we're in this kind of era where there's these attacks on any dollars that go to federal research projects, saying that it should all be privatized and that the federal government has no role in funding any of this. And that's not true. Big businesses will go to the countries, the businesses in these areas will go to the countries that are funding it, and I think the United States wants to continue to be at the table when that happens, not at the marketplace, but at the basic funding side. So for me, what I look forward to doing in Congress and what I have been doing is trying to advance that innovation economy with that three-legged stool: access to capital, a brain trust, and making sure that we encourage a risk-taking culture. Now, all of that is informed and guided by the work I do here at home and trying to stay in touch with my constituents. I've tried to use technology to my advantage when I'm back in Washington, D.C., using Skype and video conferencing to connect back to the district. I host a number of city council meetings from my D.C. office at 10 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock here. I'm meeting with council members via Skype or meeting with city councils. While they're meeting, we've Skyped into different organizations, lunch meetings. I've Skyped into community college classes. When I'm home, I think it's the different events that keep me in touch with my constituents, that inform me on these issues. Every month I do a program called In Your Shoes, where I go and work someone else's job. I've worked on an assembly line. I've worked as a paramedic. I've worked as a Head Start teacher. And then just the various ways through social media that I've stayed engaged. I do every single one of my own, Twitter and Facebook and Foursquare and Vines. That all comes from me. And
I can ask from experience, where the hell do you find the time?
Walking. You can, I walk and read, or I spend about 11 hours a week on the airplane, and so find a lot of time there. And so that keeps me, I think, connected to my constituents to know what the issues are. But all of that is for nothing. The problems that need to be fixed, the vision that needs to take us forward, it's all for nothing if we can't get a Congress that works together. So
let's come back to that for a second.
Sure.
Right? Because when you listed off the things that need to be fixed, with the exception perhaps of privacy, these things are dead in the water right now in the Republican Congress,
Right.
Republican House. Right? Immigration, marriage equality, assault weapons ban. I mean, they're not going anywhere.
Right.
And frankly, we're going to have a great economic showdown coming up again. see any of this moving. I mean, frankly, I don't think. Do you see any sign that we're really going to get immigration reform? That we're really going to get marriage equality? That we're really going to get assault weapons banned?
Well,
I
we
mean,
can't
I
give
see-
up. That's for
Yeah.
sure. As far as whether there's any sign, it was encouraging that a few California Republicans signed on to the Senate immigration plan. Congressman Denham and Valadao, and David Valadao is someone I've worked with.
Well, we thought we had a bipartisan Senate immigration
We did
plan,
in the Senate.
and
yeah.
then it sort of imploded.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's an election year.
and it's like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, as the immigrant populations grow and continue to grow, it's going to become a math problem, for Republicans. And for me, it should be do it because it's the right thing. But for Republicans, it may end up being they have to do it because, the math is undeniable that these districts in Florida and Texas that have been so carved around through their broken redistricting process, they're able to carve Republican majorities in those districts.
So
But
are you predicting you guys are going to pick up seats next year?
not next year. I hope we pick up seats next year. By 2020, the next round of redistricting, when you look at those maps in Texas and Florida and Arizona, you can only draw around those strong, growing minority communities so often. And those states and their redistricting, that's tied up in court right now as to whether they should have been able to draw districts that way. So I think this may just be something like equality for African Americans and women and gays, that it's kind of a generational shift rather than an ideological shift, and that's how we get to the moment where it happens. I hope that's not the case. I'd rather have the issue it's a good issue for Democrats politically. I think
It being which one?
immigration is an issue for Democrats, I think, to run on. But I'd rather have the victory and no longer have to tell the people who are riding our office. And we have hundreds of cases open on immigration. People fearful of being removed or have overextended their visa. That we have a fix for the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just seems like next year your chances of picking up seats to break through this are about have just become infinitesimally small.
Well,
Yeah.
in October, I would have said, with the government shutdown and the Republicans being seen as causing the shutdown, we were 2 touchdowns up. In November, with the failure of the website and just the disaster that the website was for the Affordable Care Act and the broken promise over the plans, I think now we feel like we're 2 touchdowns down. But if I've learned anything, it's that September was dominated by Syria. October was the government shutdown. November, we're talking about the healthcare website. I think the pendulum is moving back and forth faster than it has in years past, and I think the social media dynamic certainly combined with the 24-hour news cycle now, I think it's now more of like a ping pong match, and it's just who's going to be holding the hot potato come November may end up being what determines who can keep the House or lose the House.
So how does that play into a race where, say, first-term incumbent member of Congress is suddenly being hit from the left, if you will? How does that play out?
Right. Well, I think at the end of the day, it's a referendum on whether I'm doing my job. And I replaced a 40-year incumbent, and I promised new energy, new ideas. And I think the voters took a big risk. Speaking of a risk-taking culture, they took a big risk on putting me into that job. And so, I can report that I've done everything I've promised as far as connecting to the voters and bringing new energy to the Congress. And I think measuring not just the legislative agenda of the Congress, but the constituents that we've served, the 46,000 letters that have come in and the 46,000 letters that have been responded to, the $600,000 we've returned to our constituents, whether it's VA claims, IRS refunds that were owed. So I think it's doing your job as well. And then, as I said, you put markers out there on your ideas and what you would do if you were, I think, in a position to get it done. And the U.S. Congress is a lot different than the California legislature. We don't have a supermajority there. And what's frustrating about those issues you talked about, immigration reform, equality issues, background checks for guns, is that the majority of Americans support all of those overwhelmingly when polled. And in the Congress itself, in the House, the majority of the House members support that. But we operate under a rule system where the Speaker decides what comes to the floor. And so you almost have to go outside the House and put pressure on the other party to do what's right. And then this cascading effect happens, like with the shutdown, and then they put legislation forward where the majority of their members don't vote for it, but it's kind of an act of we better do this or the whole party's going to go down.
Just on that particular issue, since you bring it up, I mean, the idea that pressuring Republicans to do the right thing on background checks before their primaries are done,
right.
There's no movement until they're done with their primaries, right? So you're looking at starting effectively in June,
right,
and trying to batter them over the head with this through November. But do you really think that, I mean, if it couldn't get done this past year, do you think that this is the window where something like that can get done?
The two windows now that we have kind of come to accept are the productive windows is the lame duck session right after the elections and before the new Congress is sworn in, and then it's not even the primaries, it's when the filing period closes. That's to get really technical. On the other side, they're looking at, okay, when does the filing period in this seat in South Carolina close? Okay, our incumbent doesn't have a primary opponent at all there. He's safe to vote for this. And yeah, that's an awful way to run the country. I would say, sorry, go ahead.
I have to tell you, Eric, though, I think to Josh's point is, in a lame duck session, following Newtown, if you can't get that done then, in an election year, it seems to me to be quite a leap to think that there's any possibility of that.
Right. Well, you have to hope that it's not another tragedy that brings them to the table on this. And historically, the Senate was meant to be the slow-moving body. They were set in place to check the House, who was to reflect the changing passions of the people. Instead, the Senate is the body that passed ENDA, the Non-Discrimination Act. The Senate passed immigration reform. I think the Senate is now becoming the faster-moving body, and we're paralyzed by Republican leadership in the House. Now, I mentioned and alluded to last year, right before I was sworn in, right before Newtown, I went to orientation at Harvard University. 80 members.
You went to
orientation.
orientation.
They sent the new members there, and almost everyone in the class went. And at the lecture at Harvard University, Peter Orszag, the former director of management and budget for Obama, was giving a lecture to the new members, and he said, he laid out that the 112th Congress, the one before us, was at that time the least productive Congress, and that it was the partisanship and the bickering and the gridlock that caused that, and he challenged us to do what we could to try and defy the precedent they had set. And so 4 of us then met in the hotel lobby afterwards, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and we created a group called the United Solutions Caucus. And we met every single week, and we still meet every single week. And we've grown the group now to 30 freshman members, about 18 Democrats, 12 Republicans, meet, like I said, every single week. We have a bill that we introduced that has spending cuts over 10 years to the tune of $200 billion. During the shutdown, we met in my office the night before the shutdown. I called the group in my office and said, if we don't meet now, if we don't talk through these tough times, we should just dissolve the group because, we created ourselves to try and solve problems. And we met every other day during the shutdown, and our caucus endorsed the plan to reopen government, bipartisan members. And so we're not naive. We don't think overnight we're going to solve all the problems of the Congress, but we thought if we start as freshmen to build kind of a foundation where we can talk to each other, not always agree, but talk to each other, that we could, have a foundation and kind of swear an oath that when we're in the position to lead, that we won't, follow some of the bad examples we've seen at the top. And I think that will pay dividends in time. And this isn't a group of moderates either, because we have people to the far right and to the far left in that group. I think it's more people who want to cut deals and solve problems, because right now both of us are going to the table wanting 100% or zero, and I'd rather go to the table and sit down and, just like I did when I was a prosecutor, negotiate and strike plea agreements, knowing that if I don't, the 100 cases that I have are all going to be set for trial, and every citizen in the county is going to be coming to jury duty every week so I can try these cases, unless I'm able to strike deals. And I think that's what Americans want. And in all of our lives, we have to strike deals, and there's no deals being struck right now.
In 1974, the group was called the Young Turks, as I recall.
The Young Turks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a similar evolutionary process.
Yeah.
And
that was the Watergate caucus. They
right,
had,
it was the Watergate caucus and the aftermath of the Watergate caucus.
Yeah.
Gary Myers and some other guys
Yeah.
in the middle of that. No, I know. Well, I was. I remember it. Let's talk about a couple other things, though.
Yeah.
Since it's recent and on our tape, now with a decision by a federal court judge.
Yep.
That says high-speed rail should go forward with bonds. Do you think the federal government should continue to sock money into this thing?
We can't be the only one with skin in the game. It has to be a true public-private partnership, and that means state, county, and private financing. And I know the state has ponied up, and obviously the bonds have been thrown out, but there has to be a private partner. And right now, I know that is the part that is missing. And so, I know they're now on Plan C as far as
At least.
financing goes. So, I think this is getting more and more scaled down to reality, and the dates are being pushed farther off in time. But it's worth doing it the right way rather than a way that I think leads us to financial peril. And so, the federal government has put up billions of dollars, but as I said, we can't be the only one with skin in the game.
At what point do you say time to pull the plug?
Well, I was encouraged by Elon Musk's proposal. I mean, I think we shouldn't just accept that there's only one way to connect two parts of the state, two growing areas of the state. So, I think continuing to look at good ideas on this issue, knowing that the state is going to continue to grow, that we have great infrastructure needs, and that there has to be a path forward with federal, state, local, and private dollars.
At what point should you pull the plug on a high-speed rail?
If they can't finance it at the state level, the federal government should not pick up the tab.
And finance at the state level, you're talking about what we're really talking about is the private partnership part of it.
Right. Right.
Attracting
Yes.
capital.
That's right.
Well, you make sense.
So speaking on, since we're on rail transportation for a quick second, your likely opponent seemed to be a daily participant in the BART labor negotiations. Where were you?
Well, that I saw was something that should have been sorted out between the BART directors and management and the labor negotiating parties. I was elected to the United States Congress. I wasn't elected to the BART board, and I made a decision, as well as my other colleagues in the Bay Area delegation, to not interject ourselves and let them sort through tough issues on wages, benefits, working conditions, and retirement. But at the end of the day, that they were elected to make that decision. I wasn't elected to be in the room. I wasn't elected to assert outside pressure. And I just as I wouldn't appreciate BART directors knocking on my door when I was going through the shutdown dilemma. I don't think they would have appreciated me knocking on their door. Same with labor.
There's a novel.
Yeah, what? How about that? That's two novel ideas. Let me go out of this world a little bit, or at least out of the United States. what is your assessment and read, just intellectually, on the deal with Iran and the nukes, and A, what do you think of it as a 6-month package? B, should the Congress be kind of possibly acting on ideas that say, oh, if they don't meet the 6 months, at the end of that, we're gonna do some more sanctions or whatever, or should it be a wait and see, or just where are you there, and what are your hopes or non-hopes for any long-term deal?
Well, we should not root for Iran to fail. It is an encouraging step that has been struck with the P5+1 countries and Iran. But it does leave me with a number of concerns. One, it does not require them, it only requires that they have no new centrifuges. So the existing centrifuges can still be used. Two, it is
10,000 of them.
Right, 10,000 of them. Right, and two, it is only a 6-month interim deal, and so the deal calls on no new sanctions. And what concerns me is that there's nothing hanging over Iran's head, so to speak. So whenever I was a prosecutor and I would strike a deal with the defendant and put the defendant on probation and let them avoid prison, we would hang something over their head if they did not meet the deal. Right now, if Iran fails this deal, or if Iran, is spinning new centrifuges or enriching new uranium that they're not supposed to be doing, or producing weapons that they're not supposed to be producing, all that happens is we revert back to the old sanctions. And right now, the $6 to $7 billion in sanction relief that they're getting would just be reversed back. So we would have lost, up to 6 months of time and delay that Iran would have caused. But also, I think we will have also lost some of the willingness of our allies and other countries who have honored the sanctions to participate as well. So I would not support new sanctions. The deal doesn't allow it. I wouldn't support new existing sanctions. I do support having tougher sanctions hanging over Iran's head. So if Iran fails, new tougher sanctions would be triggered. Now, these sanctions that have been imposed are the toughest sanctions that any country has had to endure by the United States, and it has caused Iran's unemployment to be the highest in its history and its currency to be at its lowest. So the sanctions work, but so as I said, we should not root for Iran to fail, but we should prepare for them to fail, because if history has its way, they are going to fail. They are already out of they're already out of compliance with 6 separate UN treaties on the matter.
So if you were Obama, would you have gone along?
I think we had Iran pinned down. The sanctions were working. I think we should have gone for complete dismantling and destruction of their nuclear program. That was not for peace. So I don't have a problem if Iran can prove that it has a peacemaking nuclear program. That's fine. But I would have gone to destroy and dismantle every piece of their program that was not peaceful. And I think when you have the leverage that we had from the sanctions, there's no reason to delay or have an interim deal like this. And all it has done is, as I said, is it gives Iran 6 more months to delay and obstruct. But it was struck. The president has the authority to do an interim deal. A final deal would have to be ratified, of course, by the Senate. But I am hoping Iran succeeds for Israel's sake, for others in the region. Saudi Arabia, I think the only thing that's holding them back right now from trying to have a nuclear weapon of their own is the fact that Iran has not been able to get one. But as soon as Iran would get one, I don't think there's anything that's going to hold the Saudis back. So I think it would spark.
Pakistan.
Right, and they both already have them. But it would spark, I think, an arms race in the Arabian Peninsula in the Middle East that we do not want to see.
Well, there's even significant evidence that boggled my mind that Saudi Arabia and the Israelis are teaming up, and in particular the Saudis are granting airspace and air rights and even use of their bases.
Right.
And you kind of go, wait, what's happening here?
Right.
Which must show you how much both sides care about what's going on
The
there.
enemy of my enemy.
Yeah.
Right, and that area has never been this unstable. Whether it's Egypt, if you go west and you have Egypt to the north, Lebanon, and then Jordan has all the Syrian refugees pouring in there,
Well,
and
you
of course
mentioned Syria.
and then you go across the Arabian Peninsula and you have, of course, Iran, Afghanistan. I was over in Afghanistan in August, and that country has a number of challenges, and now their president is trying to play hardball at the very last moment before we sign this bilateral security agreement, and we're in the position of possibly just completely pulling the plug like we did in Iraq. And since we left Iraq, that country has just resorted to chaos, where it is almost every single day a massive suicide bomb is going off. So we don't want to see Afghanistan resort back to the country it was, where it was a breeding ground for terrorism and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And I hope that their president, Karzai, accepts the very generous agreement I think that's being offered to him by the United States and Secretary Kerry.
I know, get the Middle East settled.
So, Mr. Stark apparently still thinks you're the devil incarnate, and is going to pull out the stops to get Miss Corbett, to help Miss Corbett. How is this whole thing, this race shaking out? I mean, where are you seeing things? Who's lining up where? And give us the sense of how you're planning to address all this.
Sure. I went to Congress not expecting, or at least a little bit nervous about how I'd be received by the Bay Area delegation. And if anything, I've been, surprised as to how receptive they have been of me, how much they have worked with me. So within the Bay Area delegation, I have received support from Leader Pelosi, who has helped me on the campaign side, has endorsed me. Within the House, has given me 2 leadership positions, one as an assistant whip, and 2 as the ranking Democrat on the Energy Subcommittee for Science. Back home, I'm still, doing the same thing I did last cycle, which is keeping it local. We have the support of the majority of the mayors in our district, the majority of the council members in our district, and I think just being at home, doing what I promised is going to make all the difference in this campaign. And now the only difference, I guess, now is from last time is, I now have support from people who did endorse Pete Stark last time, and I think that shows that I can go back there and work with people who you wouldn't necessarily think would be able to work with me, who are working with me now. And so Pete Stark's influence in the race, I think the voters moved past that last time, and now this to me seems like an attempt to turn back the clock, and I don't think the voters want to go backwards. I think they want to keep moving forward, and that's what we're trying to do.
Was this a similar dynamic to the McNerney one in some ways, where he, when he was elected on such a slim margin against a long-term guy who was powerful, and his first, since he's been there, it seems like Jerry is here all the time. I think he's got a lot of flyer miles, as I guess any California representative ends up doing. But that whole districts are not that dissimilar in terms of that they're different, and you have some similar cases. I mean, but relying on the notion of contact, the contact and being here and being seen.
Right, and I think at the end of the day, this week I will hit 250,000 miles on United, however they calculate that. But that's 2 trips every week back and forth coming home. And I think people want to see you and know that you and your office are accessible. They want to be able to trust you, and they want to like you. You have to be, I think, nice and likable to people. And if you do those 3 things, I think as long as you stick to your gut and stick to your core principles of belief, they may not always agree with you, but I think they will vote for you. And that's what I've been trying to do in this first year, is try and just show up and do the job that I thought had been neglected for so long. And in time, I think these markers that I have placed down on the issues that I care about, advancing the innovation economy, the growth of the middle class, those will see successes in due time. But right now, I think just kind of repairing the neglect that many of the voters in this area have had has been one of my first duties.
So you've had the support and welcome from the Bay Area delegation. How's your relationship with the delegation? How's your relationship with Mike Honda, for instance?
Yeah, Mike and I share the city of Fremont, and we work well on that Warm Springs project together. And he's been there now, I think, 14 years, and so certainly there's wisdom that Mike has shared with me. But another person who I think has really been a real mentor for me has been Zoe Lofgren. Zoe is just, I would say, is one of the biggest brains in the Congress, especially on immigration and tech issues. And she called me. She was the first person to call me when I won, and and she's the chair of the California delegation. And she, told me everything I needed to do in the next few days after I won to prepare. And she's just kind of looked out for me ever since, as far as what I should be reading or who I should be talking to. She helped me greatly yesterday in this patent reform bill that we passed. I know it didn't receive a lot of press, but it was over 350 Democrats and Republicans voting to reform the patent system. And Zoe was one of the leaders on the Democratic side, and she and I worked together closely there. So Zoe Lofgren and George Miller, my neighbor. I mean, George is inspiring. He's been there now going on 40 years, and he comes home every single weekend. Every single weekend, he comes home, and I see him on the plane, and he is in touch with his constituents. And so every time I want to complain about that haul back and forth, George and his service reminds me that it can be done, and it's for a good cause.
Any thoughts on the challenge that Mike Honda faces?
Well, Mike Honda and Pete Stark are very different from each other. I think Mike Honda is respected in the community. I don't think Mike Honda. When I would knock on doors and tell people I was running against Pete Stark, we literally would have people chasing us down the street to make contributions or to volunteer to help, Democrats and Republicans. Mike Honda, isn't. I don't think Mike Honda is going to have that problem. I think what Roe brings, though, is something that people are looking for, which is that new energy, that new way of thinking. And he happens to also have nearly $2 million, behind him, which helps you tell your story. And so I think Roe will tap into voter sentiment that wants a new way of thinking. But I really, whenever someone says it's just like my race from last time, it's nothing like my race from last time. Mike Honda is revered in many parts of that district, and also I think just has a personal story to tell as far as growing up in an internment camp and how that's guided him on civil rights issues.
So what have you taken away, and then we'll call it a day, we won't take up too much more of your time. But what have you taken away? You went into this race, and you went in and you originally, and you talked about how Ellen had been mentoring you. How much of what she mentored you with turned out to be handy, and what were the key things that she taught you, if you will?
Sure.
That were important.
I mean, Ellen taught me that relationships matter, and that you don't have to be the expert. You just have to know who the experts are to go to, and you can't be an expert in this job. There's just too many issues. You'll sit. If you looked at my calendar, you would see in any given day I've met with an environmental group, a veterans group, a group on alternative energy, a group on the Middle East. A group for Iranian, freedom over here, or refugee Iranians. I mean, you just meet with so many different groups that when these issues come up, you can't be the expert, but you should know where to go find the expert. And so Ellen, a real steward of the lab, but her expertise was in banking, and she made the lab, she really made support of the lab, I think, the cornerstone of her service. And so it wasn't because she was an engineer. I think it's because she knew how important it was, and she knew who to go to find support for it. And so when the first 6 to 9 months, just total fog. You're just sorting through all of these issues, trying to figure out what they all mean. And then once you kind of get up to 30,000 feet, you look down, and some group, just to give you an example, one group one day, I think this was kind of my aha moment. One group one day came in from the UC, the Berkeley lab, and they wanted to talk to me about biosolids. And they talked about the joint biosolids center that they had. And literally later on that evening, 19 sanitary districts across the Bay Area met with me, and they wanted to talk about work they were doing in biosolids. And I asked them, I said, have you ever talked to the joint biosolids project over at the Berkeley lab? And they said, no, we didn't. And so I connected the two of them, and the last time I saw them, now they're working together. And that's, I think, part of your job. And that's not going to be in a legislative bill that you drop. But part of your job, a big part of your job, I think, is you're at 30,000 feet, you look down and you see this dot, and you connect them. And I think that's a perspective you get by meeting with so many people. I mean, you can't help but learn in this job, I think, if you do it right. And if you're learning, I think you start connecting and hopefully moving forward.